And I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Joan Kanigan. This is a chat that I've been eagerly awaiting, and it's how to create balance, or creating balance, how to manage the ever increasing demands on your time. Yeah, so I will let Joan take it from there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Em, and congratulations on wherever you're going, and looking forward to hearing more about that, because certainly from being outside of MAS, I've seen amazing work coming out because of a lot of what you do. So that's going to be a challenge for Wendy, I can see. So I'm just going to share my screen here to get us started. And then we're going to talk about time management and work-life balance a little bit. And I need to hide that so I can see. So one of the things that I find doing Zoom presentations is that I can't see anybody while I'm looking at my slides. So I'm hoping that that if you've got questions, please put up your hand, put them in the chat. Emma's going to be monitoring that for me because I won't be able to see those. So just a little bit of Zoom etiquette, which if you've been doing a lot of the MAS community chats, you already know. But these are just some quick reminders. And certainly if you're having any technical difficulties, please just contact Em. I wouldn't know what to do if there was a technical difficulty in Zoom. So what I wanted to sort of talk about today is just a little bit around time management and work-life balance in the about 40 minutes that we've got together. And any Google search on the phrase time management is going to bring up millions of articles, top 10 lists, and apps, all designed to help you get control of the ever-growing to-do lists that most of us have, not to mention, I know for me, the increasing number of unanswered emails that tend to sit in my inbox. And all of these articles and top 10 lists and everything are all designed with the promise of, getting more done in less time. And while getting more done in less time is very appealing, it's really only possible when you're very deliberate about what it is that you're going to want to do and need to get done. So what I'm going to do in the bit of time we have together today is just share what I've learned over many years of trying to manage my time while balancing work and life. And I'll also be sharing some of the resources that I've found to be the most helpful for anyone that really wants to go deeper than what I can actually cover in the next 40 minutes that we've got. So one of the first questions I've got for actually everybody who's here today is, if you could in the chat, or just think about it, but if you want to share, please put it into the chat. Can you type, share some of the reasons why you want to be able to manage your time? What are you hoping to be able to do? What attracted you to come to this particular session? And if you want to just unmute yourself and pop in, go ahead and do that too.
I'd like to get more done. I don't seem to be getting as much done as I should, especially as I'm getting older.
Yeah, get more done. I see in the chat we've got be more efficient, want to avoid burnout. That's an important one. Reduce stress and anxiety. Yeah, so these are all a lot of the reasons why we want to manage time, is so that we are more productive, less stressed. We have time for family and friends, more time to do the things that we even like to do. So my next question for everybody, and this can be a thumbs up or, a response yes or no in the chat. How many of you have said, I will fill in the blank when I get more time? I know certainly I have. I have this long list of, I will organize the photos on my computer when I get more time. I will, exercise more, things like that. There's a lot of things that we often do that I will when I get more time. Oh, I'm seeing a lot of people going, yep, do that a lot. Great, thank you. So one of the first things that I really want to be clear about is just the fallacy around time management. And time management is really a misnomer. So if you take nothing else out of this course today, this will be one of the most important things, is that you actually can't manage time. which is a really interesting thing since we're actually talking about time management. That's the whole focus of the course. But time itself is actually not manageable. It can't be banked. You can't save it for another day. You can't, add up a bunch of time and set it aside to be used later. And while our perception of the passage of time will change depending on what we're doing, we all get the same 24 hours each day. And once those hours are gone, they're gone. You can never get them back. So it's really important to think about time as a finite and non-renewable resource. So this makes it something that we should be most protective of, but it's also something that's really easy for us to let slip by. So today, what we're really going to be talking about is the challenge of not managing time, but how we manage ourselves within the time that we have available and within the hours that we have to do the things that are important to us. And one of the first steps around being able to manage ourselves within the time that we have is to know what's available and how we're spending our time. And the time matrix has been around for quite some time. It was actually developed or popularized by Dr. Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, for anybody who's familiar with that. And it's really about, understanding how you're spending your time and are you doing the most important work and what adds the most value to your life. And so I find that the time matrix is a really good way to think about everything that you do, because it can all fall within one of these quadrants. And the first 3 quadrants are what I like to call external, because these are quadrants that act on us. So quadrant 1 are things that are urgent and important. A great example is the grant application that's due tomorrow. That's urgent. It's also very important. So that becomes something that would be considered a quadrant 1 activity. A phone call is another example of something that's urgent, because when a phone rings, it feels urgent. You don't know if it's important or not until you answer the call, but it's definitely something that starts off as urgent. Quadrant 4 is where we tend to default to, particularly when we're like tired, exhausted, and it's just like, I'm done, I can't do anything. And it tends to be an area where we waste time. A personal example would be binge watching Netflix all day when you'd only plan to spend an hour watching your favorite program. Another example would be if you go online because you need to look up one thing for work, and then 45 minutes to an hour later you're still scrolling through the internet looking at things, and you kind of go down that rabbit hole. So, and constantly checking email is actually another thing that would sort of fall into that. It's not urgent, it's not necessarily important at that particular time, and so it's a quadrant 4 activity. Quadrant 3 is a little bit tricky, because often when something feels urgent, it also feels important. And so when you're thinking about quadrant 3 activities, we have to be careful here, because what may be urgent for someone else may not be necessarily be urgent for you. And here again is where email is a really good example. Because email is so instant, we often feel that it's necessary to respond immediately. And so I know I do this all the time. I go into my Outlook and my email to check one message or to get one piece of information. And then I start responding to all the emails that have come in, and I leave my email and I haven't actually done the one thing that I actually went into my email to do and that I had planned on. So these 3 quadrants, because they're external, they're all acting on us in a way that is taking up our time and our attention. Quadrant 2 is the quadrant where things are not urgent, but they're important. And these are things like planning, building relationships, working on that grant application 2 months before it's due so that you actually have it done a week before the deadline. They're all the proactive things that we can do to keep pressing problems from arising in our lives. And one of the most important quadrant 2 activities that we can do is practice self-renewal. So exercise, sleep, eating well. These are all things that are important, but because they're not urgent, they're very easy to put in that I will do when I have more time. I will plan my meals better when I have more time. I will work on the grant application farther before the deadline, and then things get in the way of that. So for quadrant 2 to actually happen, it's the one thing that we have to consciously make a choice and set aside the time to do these activities. And so the aim is really to spend as much time as possible in quadrant 2 so that you reduce the amount of time you're spent working on urgent things or things that are really just not important. Now, one of the things I am going to attempt to do quickly is, just so that everybody has this as a reference, I'm going to put the various quadrants. I'm going to share that with everybody through the chat so that you can refer to it, because I start to refer to them as just quadrant 1, quadrant 2, but I've been living with these for so long, I kind of know what I'm talking about when I'm thinking of them. And I know that some of this might be new for people. So the more time you can spend in a quadrant 2 activity, the less time you're going to spend in quadrant 1. As I said before, quadrant 3 can be tricky because we often associate urgency with importance. So one of the things that I've found, certainly when thinking about, well, how do I spend more time in quadrant 2? Quite often the response is, well, I don't really have time because I have all these other things that I have to do. And so it's really important when you want to increase the amount of time for quadrant 2 you have, that you start with quadrant 4, because quadrant 4 is really, it's not urgent and it's not important. So there are things that we do, whether at work or at home, that are quadrant 4 activities that we can start to reduce the amount of time we're doing them, if once we're aware of that, to be able to then create more time for quadrant 2. So an example of a work activity that's not necessarily urgent and not important is, and this one's a tricky one, but it's socializing or visiting with coworkers. Now, developing relationships with coworkers and volunteers is very much a quadrant 2 activity and very important. But if you spend half of your day visiting and then you're finding you're not getting things done, that's when that activity slips into a quadrant 4. So it can be a bit tricky to think about what quadrant something is in, but it is important to sort of think about how much time you're spending. And we'll talk a little bit about how to sort of determine when you're being distracted versus when you're actually doing the work that you're planning to do. If you plan to spend a half a day visiting with coworkers, then that's completely different than if you didn't plan to do it and now you're scrambling to get the work that you need to get done on time. And one of the other tricks that we sort of face, particularly in Western culture, is that being busy is often seen as a measure of worth. And being busy isn't a problem if you're busy doing your most important work. However, if you're constantly busy putting out fires or reacting to the next urgent thing that has come up, then it's very unlikely that you're doing the most important work that is actually going to accomplish the things that are most important to you. So when using the time matrix, one of the ways that I find it really helpful to think about using it is because quadrants 1, 3, and 4, the urgent and the non-urgent, not important, act on us. When things come up, it's really good to just take a brief moment, can even be just, a couple seconds, and determine, is it important and where does it fit within the time matrix? Is it something that really needs to be done? And this is one of the things that I keep reminding my staff, and I try to do, is when I send emails asking for information, I try to remember to say, I need this by, and give them a timeline so that it's not something that they feel they need to respond to immediately and they can plan it within the work that they're doing. I also am not really good at remembering to do that. So I'll encourage my staff anyway to, if they're doing a whole bunch of things and I ask for something, to just say, when do you need it? And if I really need it right away, then I'll let people know. So another thing to also think about when things are coming at you is, where does it fit in relation to your other priorities? And are you even the best person to be doing it? Quite often it's easy to default to, well, I'll just do it because it'll be quicker and faster. Whereas a really good quadrant 2, not important or important but not urgent activity would be developing other people to do the things that they would be better to do so that you don't actually have to do them. But it takes time to train and develop people. So quite often in the busyness of everything, we default to, well, I'll just do it because I can do it quicker. And so that's where you need to start sort of thinking about where things fit within the time matrix from the scope of your day-to-day activities. So part of thinking about work-life balance, and this is the part that I find the most challenging, but also the most interesting, is that we all have multiple roles, and the way each of our roles play out in our lives affects all of the other roles that we have. So even though we say, work and life are separate, they're really not, because if things aren't going well in your life at home, it's going to affect your work and vice versa. So everything is interconnected. And we're finding that even more so now when we're, quite often working from home and our offices are in our living room. And so it's harder to separate that, what we could easily separate before, particularly, just intellectually, I leave the office, work is done, versus you never really leave the office because you're surrounded by work right now. So thinking about the roles is one of the ways to start to create this balance. And we all have roles in our lives, and we all have many, many roles. So one of the things to think about, and you can throw these into the chat if you want to share, or just make some notes for yourself, is just think about all the different roles that you have in your life. There's all kinds of possible roles, whether you're a spouse, parent, a friend, a coworker, a leader. And one of the important quadrant to important but not urgent activities is to really think about what all your roles are and to narrow down that list to what you believe are the most important right now. And this doesn't mean that you drop or discard certain roles. It could, but it means deciding what are the few most important roles in your life that you need to concentrate on right now to make the highest contribution to the life that you want to live. And a lot of this is about thinking about what kind of life you want to be living. And I would recommend keeping this list to no more than 5 or 7 roles, which is actually really hard to do when you start to have to prioritize and narrow things down because everything feels important. And the reason for doing this is that the more that we have, the longer our lists are, the easier it is to start feeling overwhelmed, and our ability to do any of those roles really well will start to suffer. It's also important to know that roles will change over time. And this is just as a result of personal circumstances and personal interests. And so it's important to, check in and review your roles on a regular basis. A personal example for me would be when I first started working at the WDM. Obviously, my role as CEO is very, very important. It continues to be a very, very important role for me. But at that time, my other really important role was as a daughter, as a child, because I was helping support my parents as my father was going through a serious health issue. Once my father passed and my mother was able to settle and move on and do all sorts of really amazing, wonderful things, that started to open up more time to do other things in terms of, rethinking about what I want to do as a volunteer or some of the teaching work that I like to do. So the roles can change, and the amount of time you give to a role will change depending on the circumstances, and that's perfectly okay. What's important is just being cognizant of the various roles that you have and the extent to which you're doing what you want to do within each of those roles at that particular time. And so this is where planning really starts to become important, because we're not focusing on how we schedule things, but making sure that we're scheduling the things that are most important to us. And that really starts by knowing there's kind of 2 big pieces to think about when you think about work-life balance and scheduling, and just how we get things done in terms of managing ourselves within the time we have. So part of that first is knowing what your priorities are within each of your various roles, or having specific goals. So once you've identified the ones that are important, it's really good to think about, well, what does success look like? What does me being my best self in this role look like, so that you can articulate what that means to you in each of the roles, and also with any goals that you have. And sometimes you'll have roles that there won't be any goals, because it's just more of a reminder that this is an important part of your life and you want to be cognizant of it. And sometimes you'll have roles or projects or activities that you're working on that you'll need. Having a goal is a really good way of having goals. And so there's a couple ways of doing goals. There's no one, this is the best way. Most of you may have heard of SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. I recently came across SMARTer goals, which I really like because it adds exciting and relevant. Because if you've got a goal and you're not interested in it and it's not relevant to you, no matter how well you write that goal, it's just not going to be one that you're going to want to be putting the time into actually achieving. Another good way to write goals is just from X to Y by when. So it creates something specific. A good example would be I will commit to writing this particular grant application between September 1st and December 1st, so that it's done and submitted by January 15th. Another good one would be weight loss is a great one for doing that. I will go from 200 pounds to 150 pounds within 12 months. And one of the reasons that it's good to actually write down your goals is because when you write down what success looks like, or what your goals are, the likelihood of being successful in achieving them increases exponentially. It just makes a really big difference when you write it down, because putting things in writing creates a bit of a commitment to them. And so that's just a good way to kind of remind yourself, because then you also have something to go back and review and think about, where are you? The other thing that I found really helpful, and I struggled with this with goals for quite a long time, because you have this big goal and there's so many things that you have to do. And of course, a lot of the literature will say, then write down all the steps that you need to complete the goal. And invariably, I would try to do that and I would miss a whole bunch of steps and I would put them in an order that didn't make sense. So I always struggled with the enacting of goals. So what I found that works really, really well is, instead of trying to identify everything that has to be done to reach a goal, identify just the 1 or 2 next steps that you can take to move towards your goal. You don't have to map out the entire process, because that could change as you go on through time. But just the next couple of steps, the next thing that you can do that will move you a step forward, because as long as you're moving, even if it seems really slowly towards your goal, you will eventually get to the goal, as long as you're enacting something on a regular basis. So just finding out those 1 or 2 steps makes a really big difference. The other part, when we start thinking about how we manage ourselves within the time we have, is what we do with to-do lists and tasks lists. So I used to plan everything based on to-do lists, and just by, either show of hands, even though I can't see everybody, but for everybody else, how many of you use to-do lists or task lists? Oh, I'm seeing a couple of hands going up. And I guess the other question, particularly around to-do lists, because I'm going to talk a little bit about to-do lists first, is how many of the items on your to-do list are really large, complex activities that require significant thought or time to complete? One of the things that I like to put on my to-do list all the time is complete the board package. Well, when I complete the board package, it usually takes about 40 hours to complete the board package. So having that list on my to-do list really doesn't give a sense of the work that needs to be done. So when you're trying to plan your time and plan what you do, to-do lists are actually very ineffective for planning. If you just write a list down and say, here's what I'm going to do today, for a number of reasons. One is the paradox of choice. The more things we have to choose from, the more difficult it is to choose. And I know for me, I would always default to, well, I'll do the quick and easy things first, and then the really big thing that I actually need 40 hours to do tends to stay on my to-do list. The other challenge I found for me personally with to-do lists is, every time I thought of something, it would go on my to-do list for that day. And by the end of the day, my to-do list would actually be longer than what I had started with, even though I had done a whole bunch of things on the list. The other challenge with to-do lists is, of course, that everything looks the same. Doing a board package versus, making an appointment to meet with somebody, or going and dropping off the mail. Everything looks the same. So it's really difficult to know, what the longer tasks are versus the shorter and easy to use tasks. Everything also seems to have the same priority in a to-do list. Unless you're really good at prioritizing your to-do lists, everything can seem to have the same priority. And as a result, we tend to then again go to doing the things that are quick and easy. And in part of this, and this is one of the things that's really great about to-do lists, and you don't want to lose because it's important, but it's being able to check something off as done. And this has been scientifically demonstrated that when we're able to check something off of a to-do list, we get a hit of dopamine. So it's that feel good, I've done it, and you take and you get to check it off. And if you don't believe me on this, and like I said, you can put your hands up or not, but how many of you have done something, gone to your to-do list to check it off, and find out that it's not there? And what do? You put it on the list so you can check it off. I know I do that all the time when I've done something. It is a good way of keeping track of the things that you've done, but it's also, you know, being able to get that sense of satisfaction and accomplishment from doing it. To-do lists also don't have much context. At least my to-do list don't say, you know, how long is it going to take? How much time do I have available? Sometimes I remember to put due dates in, sometimes I don't. And when you have a long list that you can just keep carrying forward, there's no real commitment in terms of getting things done. So what I actually recommend and what I'm finding really, really helpful is having a master task list, because it's really important to have a list of the things that you need to do, because you can't leave those things sitting in your brain, because as long as they're sitting in your brain, you'll be worried about forgetting them, or they might get forgotten, or they're just always niggling. So you need a place where you can write down the things that you need to do so that they don't get lost. But it's how we then take and use our goals and our tasks that need to be completed is sort of how we then work towards how we manage ourselves within our time. And part of this is based around what's sort of referred to as big rocks and gravel. A lot of things on my task list are short, quick, what would be considered gravel. The big rocks are those things that are important, but not urgent. They represent the things that you value most, and they flow from the roles that you've chosen to focus on in your goals. And when you're thinking about the big rocks and gravel, if you're trying to put everything into a container, which is the 24 hours that you have, if you fill the container up first with all of the gravel and all of the little things that are not necessarily your most important or the things that you value the most, those things are not all going to fit in. But if you start, when you're thinking about your planning and how you're going to spend your time, you start with the things that are most important, you can, all the smaller things will fit in around that quite easily. And so that's one of the important things about thinking about work-life balance, is making a very conscious choice and decision to focus on those big rocks or those things that are most important to you first, and then work on all of the little things. And you can use whatever time frame you want in terms of how you like to sort of plan out your days and your weeks. I recommend don't plan anything shorter than a week, because if you're planning daily, then you tend to be reacting more than you are in terms of being thoughtful. So one of the strategies I like to use in terms of planning is I sort of, each quarter I look at, okay, what are the things that are coming up this quarter that need to get done? What are the deadlines that I have, or projects that have certain milestones in them? And then I will start to put those into a month, and then into on a weekly basis, so that I plan for a week, and then every morning I'm just checking my schedule and tweaking it if I need to, if something's come up. The other important thing is really that I like to stress is that goals are not written in stone, and they need to be updated in response to unforeseen changes that are going around us, and that's okay. But what you want to do when you're starting to think about how you schedule the way you're spending your time is you want to schedule it around the things that are most important to you, and then organize all the little stuff in the space that's left. And so one of the things that I found most useful for doing this is time boxing. And time boxing is really, it's an option to sort of live in your calendar by taking things off of your task list and your to-do list and actually putting them into your calendar. So deciding what to do at what time and for how long. And this is a really useful way to manage, even if you're still doing to-do lists, it's a really useful way to manage those lists, because they sit outside of your calendar, and you actually decide how long you're going to spend working on them. And time boxing can be a bit of a challenge, because you have to be very, very deliberate about how you're going to spend your time and what you're going to spend your time on. But surprisingly, and this is the piece that I've certainly found, is the more I schedule the things that I need to do, the more likely it is that I will actually get them done. And there's days where things come up or I get distracted and don't quite follow through, but then I actually know when I'm getting distracted or what's distracting me. So time boxing allows you to really schedule what you need to be working on, and determine what whether you're doing things and getting the right things done at the right time. And doing that really helps work in terms of managing all of the things that we have going on, and not just the busy work, but also the really important things. So one of the things I wanted to share is, well, as I said, it's not easy to follow a detailed schedule. And it is, for me anyway, important to leave some room for things that may come up unexpectedly. But when you plan out a week, and in this example, all of the blue squares are what I call the quadrant 2 work, the things that are really important, but not urgent. I then block up the administrative work. So I actually schedule time for email, and I try very hard only to check my email when I say I'm going to check my email, because again, I could spend hours just on email and then nothing else would get done. So it's good to be specific. So in a normal week of planning for me, I would actually say specifically, Monday at 10, I'm going to write the CEO report for the board, or, I will, do my planning on a daily basis, or I'll work on this grant application, or whatever it is that is most important. And I like to break into both work and things that I do personally that are important. You don't have to. A lot of people just do their planning based on their workday, which is great. I find that just doing it in the workday is a real help in terms of getting things accomplished. But if I've got other projects that are going on that, volunteer work or things that I'm doing outside of work, I will also put those into my planning, so that I'm planning around those things as well, so that I'm not neglecting what's important to me in my personal life because I'm doing so much work. Meetings, those can definitely be quadrant 2 activities, especially if you're doing planning. But we all end up in meetings that you sit there going, why am I here? And those are the types of meetings which become quadrant 3. They're urgent for somebody else, not necessarily for you. So a good idea is to think about whether you need to be in a meeting, as opposed to just going to a meeting because you've been invited to a meeting, if you have that flexibility. Because of course, some of this will depend on your supervisor and what kind of flexibility you have in your day-to-day. There's also jobs that if you're visitor services, or you're customer facing, a lot of what you do will be interrupted depending on when visitors are coming, and that's okay, because that's part of your work. And some of that, in terms of balancing that work life, is just recognizing when you might get interrupted, and if that's something that you need to, and then you just sort of plan for it. The other thing I find really helpful is identifying sort of the 3 things that I want to accomplish each week that's going to move one of my major goals forward. And then I actually schedule those into my calendar, because that also then creates a commitment that I'm going to do it, as opposed to leaving it on a list and never getting to it. So time boxing is an incredibly useful tool, but as I said, it takes a lot of discipline to be able to, I shouldn't say it takes a lot, it takes a lot of practice, and then just doing it to get into the habit of actually scheduling when you're going to do specific things. And part of the reason why scheduling can be challenging is because it's very difficult to say no to things. And so being very clear about what's most important to you makes it easier to say no to the things that would take time away from your ability to focus. And it's human nature. We will react to what's in front of us, whether it really matters or not. So taking some time to think about what's important and prioritizing those in writing will allow you to, when something comes to you, to be able to think again, is this important? Where does it fit within the time matrix? Is it something that I should be doing? And I know that prioritizing is hard, but if everything's a priority, nothing is. And really being able to have that work-life balance does mean being able to say no to things, even if they're good things. But if they're not the best things, then they can take away from doing the work that you really want to be doing, or living the life that you really want. And so part of all of this, being able to do all of these things, do the time boxing, follow through on the schedules that you set for yourself, is really about learning how to manage and avoid distractions. And there are tons of distractions. Distractions are really easy they exist everywhere. But one of the things I found most interesting in some of the research I've been doing around this, and it's I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on this, but I've included the resource. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend reading Nir Eyal's book called Indistractable, because one of the things that I didn't realize, but a lot of distraction actually starts from within us as a way of avoiding something that feels uncomfortable or might be difficult. So an example would be, well, I have to write this report. I don't know where to start. Not sure what I'm going to put into, what I'm going to do. So then you look for ways to distract yourself. So just as a question to think about, I mean, how often have you sat down at your computer to begin working on a big project just to find yourself checking email first to make sure there isn't anything important that you have to respond to? I know I've done that quite often. Or, you sit down to do something, and just as you're about to get started, you need to make another cup of coffee. This is a way of distracting ourselves from sitting down and doing some of the work that we need to do. External distractions are also very much a part of being able to, manage and do this, get the work done that we want to get done within the time that we've set for doing it. And a couple of tips just for controlling external distractions. First one is turn off notifications. Even if you don't stop to look at a notification, you're going to be distracted by it, because it'll go off, and somewhere in the back of your brain, it'll be, I wonder what that was, until you actually check it to find out. I definitely find that checking email at scheduled times is a really good way to avoid, spending the entire day doing nothing but responding to emails. And an interesting study that was done by the Harvard Business Review showed that just checking anything, even if it's, they say for a tenth of a second, but even for a minute, can add up to a 40% productivity loss over the course of a day, because it can take up to 20 minutes to get back into the zone of what you were working on when you've been distracted from it. And this is why scheduling time to do, particularly to do the deep thinking work that usually adds the most value to our jobs or to our positions, is important to block those times off, and also block that time off in your calendar so that people know not to be interrupting you. Email filtering is another really great way to keep the number of email messages in your inbox down. One example, I have a folder that whenever I'm CC'd on an email, that email automatically goes into my CC folder. And I may not look at that folder for 2 or 3 days before I go and see what's I've been CC'd on, because if I've been CC'd on something, it means it's for my information. It doesn't require a response from me. And so I deliberately plan when I'm going to look at that information. And I get CC'd on a lot, so it just keeps things out of my inbox. You can do this with newsletters that you receive, certain notifications that you need to get, but you don't want to have them popping up all the time. Those are, email filtering is just a wonderful tool for keeping the inbox down. It's also really good to, in terms of managing distractions, is to, if you're not using an app on your phone or your desktop, take it off. Keep whatever's on your desktop screen to a minimum, and keep your workspace decluttered as much as possible, because clutter adds to distraction. I know at my office, there's usually nothing on my desk, and it's because I've hidden it all in a drawer, but at least I'm not seeing it right away. So that helps. And that's also one of those, when I get more time, I will clean the drawer in my desk. So one of the things I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of homework, and you should block some time in your calendar to actually work on this, but think about the roles that you have, create a list of them, identify the ones that are most important to you right now. And then it doesn't have to be elaborate, but in a couple of sentences, what does success look like for you in each of these roles? What contribution do you want to make? What are you hoping to achieve? And then look at rating your performance. Are you achieving what you want to be doing? Are you underperforming? One of the resources, the 5 choices, has a great spidergram. If you like to be visual with this kind of work, in a way of just putting all of your roles into essentially a pie-shaped circle, and then putting dots depending on where you are in each of those roles. And then once you've sort of done that, think about, the 1 or 2 things that you can do next week to get a little bit closer to your vision of success, or to have some of that time, and then put some time in your calendar to actually follow those steps that you've identified. So in keeping with the, we don't want to give you lists and lists of things, because prioritizing, as difficult as it can be, is also incredibly important. I've given you my top 5 resources that, if you read nothing else or don't dive into anything deeper, look at these books. The 5 choices is a really great one. Indistractable, which I've talked about, and then Atomic Habits. Because these 3 books, they all look at how we manage ourselves and how we use our time, and how we become, more productive, less stressed. They all approach it from a different perspective, but when you take all of those 3 resources together, they really start to kind of clarify how all of these pieces that I've been talking about today sort of fit. If you want something really, really quick, just around building schedules and doing the the matrix for schedules, then I would look at the 2 articles that I've had here for you as well. They're quick and easy reads, and all 3 books are actually very quick, easy reads, and the information is really digestible, and they've even got some activities that you can do to start reinforcing some of these changes in behavior in terms of how you work within our time. So the managing ourselves within the time that we have. Here's a few more additional resources if you're looking for a few other things that you want to explore. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much, and looking forward to questions. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see people.
Awesome. Thank you, Joan. That was really great. Just a quick question off the top. Would you be willing to share your presentation with folks?
Absolutely. I actually have it ready to go right now. Thank you for
Awesome.
reminding me of that. I will put it into the chat.
Great. Thank you.
So that everybody has it. And feel free to share this with anybody, when you post the video, if you want to share it through that as well, if people want it. Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of really good resources in there for sure. If anybody has any questions, please just feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat there.
Yeah. Or other ideas or suggestions or things that you find have helped you in terms of being able to do time management in a way that works for you.
Well, one of the things that I've tried, given working remotely, and so I moved my home office, into a specific space. So it wasn't on my dining room table. So I didn't have to pass it all evening long. And because I find for my ability for my brain to sort itself out and be able to be productive during the day, I have to stick to a pretty rigid work life schedule. So I work from like 7:30 in the morning till 4 o'clock. And then I leave the office, I change, and then my brain can not be focused on work stuff. Otherwise, I know I would be doing work constantly, and that would be exhausting. So that's one of the things that I've had to learn to do.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great tip for, especially when we're working in this hybrid work at home, work at work.
Definitely one of the things too that I would like to add that I don't know if you've ever read the book or done any research with Getting Things Done by David Allen. That's something, that's a book that I read about 5 years ago, and it totally changed my life and how I do things and prioritize and all that. So that's one thing, if folks are interested, that's one that I found really effective too.
Yeah, that's actually another really good resource. I just, like I said, I had to prioritize. I don't want to give you like this huge long list, but Getting Things Done is a really good, as you said, Em, one of the things I find particularly with that's been really helpful for me is how I organize all those files and pieces of paper, so that I'm not spending an hour looking for something that I know I have in this pile somewhere.
Yeah, I found the calendar matrix really, that's something that I've been using without having read about it, but it just made sense to me. So I like that template, and that it is a good idea.
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question. Sometimes I don't know how long to keep certain things, like paper. When you mention paper, whether it's bills or just certain documents or something. Like there's certain things it's hard to know how long to keep them, so I keep them too long, and then it's more too organized.
I think that's a challenge that most of us can relate to, and it really depends on what the documents are. I know with government, like income tax, I believe it's 6 or 7 years. I can never remember, so I always go by 7. Payroll documents you basically have to keep indefinitely if as an employer. And then other things, yeah, probably the easiest thing to do, and archives and corporations are really good at this, is creating kind of destruction schedules for documents. So, the stuff in this box will be destroyed in 3 years, and they just every year they go and see what's happening in that particular year. But yeah, that's a tricky one. I'm not sure I can be really super helpful on that, because it really depends on the particular documents. And trust me, I know, because we're in the process of moving, and I found a box of things from grade 9 that I'd been hauling across the country a couple of times. So then I was like, okay, I don't think I need this anymore.
Thank you.
And basically museum people are hoarders anyway, so we just have to learn to give stuff up from time to time. Just saying.
Yeah, it's one of my colleagues said one thing that helped her was begin again. So maybe we could get all this great information, right? And then information gets outdated, you want to add something to it. So that's something that I've tried to do, is just begin again. And so sometimes that gets tossed because I can find that information someplace else. But yeah, I know it could be a challenge. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I don't see much coming up in the chat other than accolades. It was a really, really fantastic presentation, Joan. So thank you for doing that. And
my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, really, really appreciate it. It's always good to think about this sort of stuff intentionally, for sure. Yeah. I'll just give a quick preview of our next community chat. It's going to be a really exciting one. It's our 2021 Mass Awards ceremony. So we're going to spend some time recognizing excellence within the Saskatchewan Museum community, which is always fun. And I'll be there for that chat, and then that'll be my last one. So that'll be kind of funny. But yeah, thanks to everybody for joining. And yeah, thanks again, Joan. And we will see folks on the 29th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joan. Great work.